Welcome to the TINAH Talks Podcast, where time is not a healer, but we believe we all have the power to heal ourselves and take our own mental well-being into our own hands. This podcast is a byproduct of TINAH, the mental well-being marketplace, and a community platform at timeisnothealer.com, providing you with the best products for your self-healing journey. Hit subscribe and follow us on socials if you want support on your mental well-being journey. Today's episode is a solo episode from me. Normally I have my co-founder Kelsey with me, but today I am going to be your host, and this episode is all about the signs you need to look for when your mental health might need some attention. So Kelsey's on holiday, she's away traveling in South America at the moment, and it's Mental Health Awareness Week, so I felt like it was a really important time to do an episode, regardless of whether she's here to host with me or not. So my first solo episode for on this podcast. If you listened to last week's episode, you would have heard me talking about my personal journey and experiences with mental health. And there's a lot that I obviously didn't share. You can't get around to sharing everything in 35-40 minutes. So I'm going to save quite a lot of that for like another time. But in this episode specifically, I really want to talk about the signs that presented in me specifically when I realised that my mental health needed some attention, particularly in aid of the fact that it is Mental Health Awareness Week this week. And I just want to share my personal experiences with picking up on signs and recognizing things that I needed to address within myself to actually support me on my mental well-being journey. And this is a full disclaimer, I am no psychologist or don't have any qualifications in that world. However, I have, if you've been following along for a while, will know I have been in and out of therapy myself. I have been on a very long self-development and healing journey by myself. So I'm speaking all of this from my personal experiences. I've also done a lot of research into this field. Obviously, with setting up a business in this area, I've had to really get to understand everything around like the signs and symptoms of different challenges that you face when you're struggling with your mental health. So I can speak from my personal experience, but please don't feel like I am trying to give advice. This is mainly from my personal experiences, and I want you to kind of see if it resonates with you and then go on your own journey of self-discovery and figuring out whether something that I've suggested may or may not be relevant to you. So some of the signs that I really realised when I first realised that I was struggling with mental health, some of the signs that I was experiencing when I first realised that I was struggling with my mental health. The first one was definitely an overwhelming feeling of overwhelm. So that kind of presented in me in the sense of like everything felt like it was really hard, and even like the small little tasks just started building up, and all of this fear to go and do those tasks, it just felt scary. Like everything felt like it was going to be a massive challenge, a massive hassle, and everything just felt really overwhelming. And that could kind of feel like, you know, like you've got a ton of bricks being pushed down onto you, and you can't come up for air. That's the only way I can describe that overwhelmed feeling. And that for me was like a starting point of recognizing, okay, something's maybe not quite right here. I need to address, like, why do I feel this overwhelmed? All I need to do is do this tiny little task, like I'm gonna go out and buy a pint of milk or something like that. But it just felt so hard, it felt so stressful, so scary. And then it was like anything that got added on, it just felt like it was just too much. Like everything just felt like it was too much. And it's at that point that I realized, okay, that's not normal. Like I don't normally get overwhelmed by these things. So if you've ever struggled with that, where previously something didn't overwhelm you, it was really easy for you to do, but then suddenly something now is feeling really overwhelming and daunting and scary, that might be something to think about, that it may or may not be a challenge with your mental health. Another thing that kind of ties in with that, but also has its own justification to be in this list on its own right, is not focusing on the present moment. So when I was in a period of like quite severe depression, they always say that like depression comes from you thinking about the past, and anxiety comes from you thinking about the future. I had both of those things. So I was worrying about what happened in the past and also worrying about what was going to happen in the future, which meant that I was not living presently. I wasn't experiencing the things that were happening at that moment in time. I was always thinking ahead or about what had happened before. Now, that is a really unhealthy place to be in, because ultimately you can't change anything that's happened in the past, and you have absolutely no idea what's going to happen in the future. So it's completely out of your control. So getting caught up on those things is actually a really difficult place to be, and it's not healthy for your mental health in any way. So I felt like I was kind of constantly just not there. Like I wasn't living there in that moment in time. I was always just like reminiscing about something in the past, or thinking like, oh, what if this happened in the future? Which is a normal thing to think, like particularly about the future. But dwelling on the past lets us stay in the past. And when you're looking back, you can't look forward. And when you're not living presently, you're not enjoying the things that are happening in that present moment in time. You're not absorbing all the things that are happening to you. You're not present in conversations, which, how can you enjoy a moment if you're not really in it? How can you really expect yourself to feel happy at a moment in time if you're not really living in that moment in time? You're always living in the future or the past. So again, like I didn't realize this until I went through some therapy, and I was talking to my therapist, and she was kind of saying, you know, it doesn't really sound like you're living like presently. And like the reason that, for example, I always said to her, like, I feel so much more at peace when I'm traveling. And she was like, well, that would make sense, because you're always living in the present moment when you're traveling. When you're on holiday or you're experiencing travel, or like experiences away from home, it's going to be way more enjoyable for you, because you're actually absorbing what's happening. Yeah, you don't have the time when you're on holiday, because your nervous system is so fully relaxed usually to think about, to worry about the future, to think about the past. You're living in that present moment, you're enjoying the experiences that are happening. So when I started to realize that actually I was never really fully in that present moment, that was a massive sign for me that, again, something needed to shift with my mental health and behaviors. I used to always also have a really, really busy brain. And I used to always say to my housemate, for example, I'd be like, what does your brain sound like when you go to sleep? Because mine is constantly racing. It just felt like my brain switched on at like 11 p.m. and it has all of these ideas, all of these thoughts, intrusive thoughts. I could be thinking about a conversation I had like 10 years ago and still like playing it over in my mind. It would be like every weird or bad thing that ever happened to me, I was like starting to think about like 11 p.m. at night, which obviously is not good, because then you're not getting to sleep on time. That could like last a few hours. It's a real struggle. You're tossing, turning, trying to get to sleep, and you're just constantly living in that place. But again, you're living in the past because you're constantly thinking about things that happened before, or you're also maybe living in the future because you're still thinking about, oh, I need to do this tomorrow, I need to do that this next week. So you're like, there's that constant thought process going on of things that were happening or are about to happen. And again, you're not trying to be present, you're not trying to go to sleep. That's your main priority at that moment in time, but yet you're not focusing your attention on that. You're focusing on the attention on everything else. So again, like when I went through a period, probably about 2-3 years, where my brain was just wild at night, 10 p.m. without fail, it would switch on and just start going at me with all of these thoughts. And again, that led to then all of the overwhelm, because then I was thinking, it was all just bubbling up, and I was thinking at midnight, like every night, oh my god, I need to do this tomorrow, I need to do that, oh my god, I haven't done that today, oh my god, that conversation that I had the other day, what does that person think about me, blah 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 blah. And that just leads you into like this real crazy negative spiral. And then in turn, because you can't get to sleep, because your brain's so working so fast and so hard, you're not getting enough sleep. And obviously we know that sleep is proven to support positive mental health and physical health, and we need our 7 to 8 hours a night of sleep, depending on whether you're male or female. And I wasn't getting that. I was getting maybe 5-6 hours. So then I'd wake up, and the overwhelm then starts bubbling up even more, because I'm tired. My body hasn't had a rest. So again, if you're experiencing those my thoughts racing at night in your head. Like, some people just say that they're night owls, and I don't disagree with that. Like, I definitely work better in the afternoon, in the evening, in the night. Like, when I've had a day to like of stimulation, I then actually work better. But if you're experiencing that where it's like causing you sleep deprivation and worry and overwhelm, that is not healthy for you. And there needs to be a way to, like, you need to find a way that can like calm down your brain and get into that bedtime routine that's going to help you fall asleep easier, calm your nervous system down, again, take you back to that present moment. That present moment, you're trying to fall asleep, you're not trying to think about what's happening tomorrow, you're not trying to think about what happened yesterday. You need to go to sleep at this moment in time. So it's all about trying to figure out a routine that works for you. Like, one thing that I started doing when I lived back in London, when I actually had this at its worst, was just trying to read before bed, and also listening to bedtime meditations, because this sometimes audio, like listening to somebody's soothing, calming voice when you're going to sleep, can really help you take you back to that present moment and think about what that person is saying. Maybe it's an audio book, maybe it's guided meditation, whatever it is for you, but usually they say it in a very calming, peaceful voice, and it's quite nice. So that was my first kind of point of call to try and get my brain to switch off at night. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Now I've kind of mastered it a little bit more, but I know that one is probably one that is happening for quite a lot of people. The other thing that I really struggled with was memory loss. Now, memory loss happened to me so much when I was in my peak challenging times of my mental health, and it would happen to me all the time, where I would like walk into a room and be like, why am I here? Or I would get to the end of the day and be like, I can't remember what I've done today. Or it would be like, I can't remember what I'm doing tomorrow. Or like, just there were so many little things that like added up, where I just kept forgetting. And traditionally, I've always had, up until that point, I always had a really good memory, and I know that I remember names, I remember faces, I remember conversations, I remember places. And it started slipping away from me, and I started to get very worried because my memory was fading and I wasn't as switched on as I normally was. And that to me was like one of the most concerning signs of what was happening to me with my mental health, because that really indicated to me something must be seriously wrong. If I've gone from having a great memory to having an absolutely crap memory, I need to make a change here. So definitely, if you're experiencing memory loss, now obviously some people are just forgetful people, and that's okay. But if it is something that you know that you were good at before and it's changed, that is a warning sign to you to say there's something wrong here, there's something that you need to address. And I think a lot of people just put it off and they're like, oh, I'm getting older. But no, actually, like, if you are experiencing high periods of stress, if you are experiencing high periods of overwhelm or anxiety, memory loss is a side effect of that. So a symptom of that. So I would definitely not just disregard it as like nothing, or that you're being silly or whatever. Have a look into what is causing that memory loss and try to get to the root of the problem, because it can be really dangerous if you carry that on for years. And then that kind of is like that underlying hum of, oh, there's a problem here, but I'm not addressing it. So definitely, if you have seen that your memory has changed quite significantly in a short period of time, I would definitely have a think about why that might be. The other thing I did definitely get was physical pain. And there was a few instances of this, and in hindsight and looking back in the situation, it was all presented because my cortisol levels were inflamed and I was experiencing high levels of stress in my body. And stress in your body presents in physical pain. There was actually a period of time where I had the most excruciating pain in one of my breasts, and it got to the point where like I couldn't sleep on my front, I couldn't sleep on my side. I was in so much pain all of the time. Like, it was so sensitive, and it wasn't like a hormonal pain. It wasn't like it just came at the time of the month. It came all the time. So I actually went to a breast clinic to check, and she was saying that I had so much inflammation in my breast tissues. Nothing like seriously wrong, but she was like, it's probably caused by stress. And that wasn't just that. I also then had joint pains on top of that. There was actually also a period of time where I was under observation for lupus. I was in rheumatology department. I was an inpatient in rheumatology or an outpatient. I can't remember which one is which. And I was actually being under observation for lupus because they thought I had an autoimmune condition, when actually, again, looking back at that, it was all just because of inflammation in my body, inflammation and stress. But they weren't looking at that. They were thinking that I had some kind of condition. Which in the end, after 2 years of observation, I actually got discharged and there was nothing wrong with me. They could never find an actual problem, which is pretty crazy. But in hindsight, it's very clear to me to see that I had all of this information in my body and it was actually presenting in physical pain. There was actually no serious underlying health problems. It was all a mental thing. And when your mental health is off, your physical health is off. Another example that I have of that is more recently, actually. I was, and it can work the other way around. I was actually in Peru and I had been struck down by food poisoning. I also had quite severe altitude sickness when I was going into the mountains and climbing and doing some hiking and stuff. And the mental effect that that took on me was very, very drastic. I really was in quite a good place before I had all of these problems. And then my gut suddenly obviously has all of these issues because I start having food poisoning. And then suddenly all of this like physical symptoms that are happening in my body, which then causes mental symptoms. So it can also work the other way around. But definitely if you've got any gut issues, like for years when I was in my early 20s, I always thought I was gluten intolerant because I had so many gut issues and I would cut out all of these foods and like go on these crazy diets. And actually, again, looking back at it, I was just severely depressed, anxious and stressed. And I was coping with eating probably the wrong foods, which then again causes inflammation in your gut. And it just gives you quite a lot of digestive problems. So if you are experiencing physical pain out of absolutely nowhere, and there's no real reason or medical diagnosis for that pain, I would really seriously consider thinking about like your nervous system management, and how can you manage your nervous system to eliminate any of the physical pain that you're experiencing. Because I remember seeing on someone's Instagram story quite recently where they were asking for advice for like, they were holding a lot of tension in their neck and shoulders. And I remember, and she was like, what do I need to do? Do I need to go to a massage? Do I need to go to a doctor? Like, well, who do I go to? And I was just thinking, none of the above. Like, it's very clear, if you're holding tension in your body, you've got stress in your upper back, you are tensing. Like, it means your body is tensing up to a certain scenario, you're feeling anxious about a certain scenario. Like, and if this person was to maybe work on her like nervous system management, her nervous system control, probably quite a lot of that tension would release. She wouldn't need to go for the massages all the time, she wouldn't need to go to the doctors, because it would just naturally release. I'm not saying don't get yourself checked out, absolutely get yourself checked out, because there might be something more seriously underlying. But as a first point of call, try it. Like, try and release your nervous system, try and release the emotions that are stored in your body, because the body stores so much emotion and you need to release it on a regular basis to release the tension that you're experiencing. I remember I used to always, when I used to drive in the UK, when I used to drive, I used to always hold so much tension in my legs. And I remember I used to go down the motorway, and whenever I was driving down the motorway, I would always just feel myself like my leg was tensing up, like whenever I was driving. And I was like, what the hell? And then I realized, I was like, no, like I need to release that. Like, I'm stressed because I'm like surrounded by cars, I'm going 70 miles an hour. I'm not a nervous driver in any way, but again, like your body just stores all of this stuff. So if you're feeling tension or pain, there could be an emotional issue attached to that. It might not necessarily just be a physical issue. So it's definitely something to have a look into. Something else that presented in me a lot when I was really struggling, and I've had to learn how to manage this and deal with this, was anger and frustration. So a lot of that came from me not understanding how I was feeling and understanding my emotions, the emotions that I was experiencing. So because I didn't know how to manage and handle those emotions or even understand what they were, I just constantly felt angry. I constantly felt frustrated. I was constantly taken out on other people. So again, if you're quite a like chill, happy-go-lucky person, or you've got like a really short fuse, I would definitely have to think about like, why is your fuse so short? Like, what's triggering you? Because there's probably something else that's like bubbling under the surface that you're not really quite aware of. You're not really angry at the situation that's happening. You're angry at a trauma that you've had in the past. but it's presenting in that way right now because you don't know how to deal with it. I always remember, like, when I was a kid, my parents used to say, "You're such an angry person sometimes," or like I would get really like irate about things that like really weren't big deals, or like in the grand scheme of things weren't a big deal. And I used to just take that out and feel so frustrated by everybody else. But again, in hindsight, looking back at that, it's just because I didn't understand my emotions, and I didn't understand like where my emotions were coming from, or like what the feelings that I was experiencing. So I just took it out on everybody else, and that came presented as anger to me. So again, if you're somebody that like really does get frustrated and stressed about little tiny things, and you're looking around you and thinking, why does no one else get stressed about those things? It's probably an internal issue for you. And it's really easy to be like, why is everyone else so chilled? This is just me. But actually, usually those feelings are presenting because of something that's underlying in a mental or emotional problem. The other thing that I did experience was disassociation. So particularly when I was like struggling from a period of depression, I went through a phase where I would look in the mirror and I just didn't understand like who I was. I didn't recognize the person I was seeing in the mirror, and that is called disassociation, where you're living your life on a day-to-day basis, but actually you feel like you're watching yourself from a bird's eye view, and you're not really actually, again, not living presently. So kind of like feel disassociated and disconnected with yourself, with the people around you. Looking in the mirror and not really recognizing yourself is like one of the most scary things, because you're like, like I don't know who this person is. And that is for me like probably the biggest sign that you really do need to start thinking about like what's happening, why do you feel so disconnected from all of the things that you're experiencing, because you can't go on like that. Ultimately, like the longest relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself, and it needs to be a really positive one. So if you're starting to feel disconnected from yourself, then there's a real issue there. I actually remember going to see like a therapist or someone when I lived in Bali, and they immediately called it out. They're like, the reason you're feeling this way is because you're so disconnected with your emotions. And we obviously have different sides to us. We have an emotional side, we have a mental side, we have a physical side. If you have a spiritual side as well, like all of these sides of us need to be connected for us to feel whole as a person. And when we start feeling disconnected or disassociated, it's because they're not in alignment. And that could potentially be because, you know, you're not living in your truest self. Let's say, for example, you're living in an environment or surrounded by people that don't really believe in the same things as you, or that then you're not living in alignment with the things that you know are good for you. And this, I do this all the time to myself. Like, so often do I put myself in environments or in friendship situations where I'm like, this isn't right, but like I persevere through it anyway. And that's not okay, like, because you're not being true to yourself. Sometimes it's essential for like life, like you can't always like love the people that you work with, for example. Some things are just essential, and you don't always have the choice to like move away from them. But your family is your family if you want them to be in your life. But when they don't see the world in the same way that you see it, it can feel a really lonely and isolating experience. And actually you start to try and conform to what you think that they want you to believe in. And that is like just doing yourself the biggest disjustice you could possibly do, because you're just going to start feeling more and more disconnected, more and more disassociated with yourself, rather than trying to like step into your power, step into the things that you love doing and experiencing and living in an environment that you love to live in. You're going to start feeling that is one of the reasons why you feel so disassociated with it. So again, if that's something that you have experienced, definitely start trying to get to the bottom of like, why do I feel so disconnected? Like, what is out of alignment for me? Am I living into my truest and most authentic version of me? And that's going to really help you understand like how to change that about yourself. Something else I've experienced as well is stubborn weight that I can't lose, and a puffy face. Like if I'm ever experiencing increased heightened cortisol levels or a dysregulated nervous system, no matter how much I didn't eat or how much exercise I did do, nothing could change the fact that I had this like stubborn muffin top around my waist. And a puffy, inflamed face. At one point, I actually had inflammation all over my body. where like my toes, my hands, everything was swelling up at once. And it was just simply because of like increased cortisol levels, which is when you're going through high periods of stress, your cortisol levels rise, and you need to be actively trying to like calm down your nervous system to reduce the cortisol, and like releasing any trapped emotions, for example, by doing exercise, going for a walk, putting yourself in nature, like trying to do practices in your day to reduce those cortisol levels and balance out that hormone for yourself. Also in certain foods that you eat. But that is definitely something that I know so many people struggle with, and a lot of people are just like, well, I'm just this body shape, or oh, I just have a round face. Maybe you do, maybe, yeah, but like also if you've ever experienced, particularly if you experience living in survival mode where you aren't always kind of trying to, you feel like you're constantly in a battle, you're constantly trying to just like doggy paddle your way through life, that will definitely be playing a part, because it was probably at that point like a bit of chronic stress. So if you are really struggling to lose weight, or if you are struggling with like that puffiness in your face when you're waking up every single morning, that could be down to like increased cortisol levels, in which case it's a nervous system management thing that you need to address. We're on point number 9 now. So the next one is like never crying or never feeling your emotions. So some people I've met in life always tell me they just don't cry. And when I was younger, I could probably say up until the age of about 24, 25, I just didn't really feel my emotions. I didn't really cry. I didn't really get upset about things. People would watch things on the TV and burst into tears, and I'd be like, why are you crying? It's not that sad. Now, the reason normally that you're not feeling these emotions is because you're storing these emotions inside of you. You're not crying and letting those emotions out. You're not trying to actively release the emotion, which means it gets trapped into your body. And that's what then causes the tension, the overwhelm, the anxiety. So one thing that I've really learned over the past like few years since I've been going on this self-development journey is that you have to release the emotions when you feel it, otherwise you hang on to it. Because when you start hanging on to emotion, that's when you start hanging on to the past as well. Because if you imagine, if you've experienced something really, really challenging in your life like a year ago, you never processed or released those emotions from that time, you're still holding on to that, you're probably still thinking about it. The emotions trapped in your body is probably presenting in other ways now. And if you think about like a child, and they have like tantrums, they have like crying fits, like they cry for what they want because they're releasing their emotions. They have a tantrum because they're angry, they get it all out, they like move their body, they shake their body, they release the emotion from their physical body, and then that calms their brain down. So you can see a kid like five minutes beforehand, it's like kicking and screaming, then he's like running off, like smiling, having a great time. He's released his feelings, he's released his emotions. That is the best thing you could possibly do for yourself, even as an adult. Learn how to cry, learn how to like scream, just get it all out, whatever it is that you need to do to release your emotions. Also exercise, like getting it out by pumping endorphins and stuff around your body is going to be a really good way, because it's just like a way to release whatever tension is building up inside of you. So if you don't ever feel your emotions, if you feel like you never really feel, we're all human beings ultimately at the end of the day, we all have emotions, we all have feelings. Some people feel them more than others, but if you don't feel them at all, then there's probably something holding you back and stopping you from preventing them, because you're scared to feel your emotions. So again, something to consider if you are struggling with like your emotion regulation. And then the final point that I just want to touch on is feeling like something bad or scary is always going to happen. So this is just a symptom of anxiety. This is a feeling that presents when you have anxiety. And nobody wants to live in fear. Let's be honest. Nobody wants to literally sit there on a daily basis and think, oh my God, what if this happens tomorrow? Because then you're never living in that present moment. You're always living in the future, and it's always a what if. And ultimately that what if is out of your control. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You can't control that. The only thing you can control is how you act in that moment in time to whatever situation is presenting to you. So if you always feel like you're on edge, or like there's something, an underlying fear bubbling up in you, address what that fear is. Try and figure out, what is that fear? What is that thing that's holding you back? Because I can imagine that it is holding you back. Let's say you've got a fear of going out on your own, leaving the house on your own. Like, how many experiences are you missing out on just because you don't want to go outside on your own? Like, what is holding you back? Like, you need to get to the bottom of that emotion. Like, why is that fear coming up for you? And the only way you can overcome that is by tackling things head on. The only way you make changes is by tackling things head on. So any of these things, if you've experienced any of these things that I've mentioned on this list, or if you can resonate with any of those things and you're thinking, oh, well, actually, yeah, I do sometimes feel like I'm disassociated, or I do feel like I'm struggling with memory loss, or I do feel like I don't feel my emotions. The only way, unfortunately, that you get over these things is by saying, I need to make a change, and like actually tackling the core root of the problem. Like, otherwise it is going to linger there forever. So if you do resonate with anything that I've kind of said today, again, I'm speaking from my own personal experiences. These are all things that I have experienced over probably the past 6 to 7 years, and then probably before that, but I don't really associate before that time because I wasn't self-aware enough to understand like what all of these things were. But in the past 6 years, I've really started to understand my body. I've really started to understand why I feel some of these ways, and then I've been able to change things about my life, change things about my habits, my behaviors, to actually put processes and practices and routines in place to support me and get me out of some of these things. Like, I can very clearly tell you now that I now do feel my emotions where I didn't feel them for many years. I no longer feel disassociated. I feel very much in alignment because I know what I need and what I want as a person to keep me going and feeling happy. I don't get frustrated or angry by silly little things anymore. I actually am very rational and very calm in my brain whenever I need to make decisions, or whenever someone hasn't treated me in the way that I would like to be treated. Don't get me wrong, there's obviously moments when I feel infuriation, but you know, these things are all possible to change, and it's just that you need the right toolkit. And ultimately, you need to educate yourself. The first step is becoming self-aware, and then it's about like getting to the core of the problem, and then understanding how to like change your thought patterns and behaviors. And that, my personal first experience of that, if you go back to last week's episode, you'll know that was going to CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, to really understand why I was the way that I was, and then I went on my healing journey from there. So if you are interested in hearing more about my journey, please go back and listen to last week's episode, and you'll hear me speak about quite a lot of these things in more detail and how they presented for me and in what order and what I did about them. We can do more episodes. As you know, we do episodes every week talking about different challenges that you might face in your mental health, different coping mechanisms that you can use. And when we launch Team in the Marketplace, you are also going to be provided with the toolkit to actually help you change some of these things about yourself if you want to go on that journey to change. So if that's something that you're interested in, please stay tuned, because it's coming very, very soon. We're super excited. We are like very close to launch now. We're just putting some final touches to the platform. We are going to be a mental wellbeing marketplace, which means essentially we are going to be recommending new products, services and apps to support you on your mental wellbeing journey. For now though, thank you for listening to this episode today. If it did resonate with you, be sure to give us a like, and we'd love to hear your feedback in the comments below about what topics you'd like to hear more about. Don't forget to subscribe, follow us on socials, and join the community at timeisnothealer.com. All the details can be found in the episode description below, and remember, you have the power to heal. Until next time, you've got this.